White Fang was directed in 1992 by Randall Kleiser, which is an adaptation of the original White Fang novel by Jack London. As the film follows Jack Conroy on his search for gold and how White Fang the wolf dog tags along. The other film I chose was Into the Wild, directed by Sean Penn in 2007, through the perspective of a high school graduate, Christopher. These American films are both based in Alaska. Because of this, I'll be diving into the ideas and theories of nature, as well as how this plays into our main characters finding the key to happiness. Both of these films discuss happiness under differing variables. Into the Wild is from the perspective of a young, rebellious teen who runs away from an abusive household and society. White Fang is about a young man that wants to fulfill his father's legacy by finding gold. But along the way, he falls in love with the pure nature of Alaska and White Fang. White Fang begins with the new spread of people migrating toward Alaska for gold. Jack joins this search to follow in his father's footsteps. Into the Wild is, in a way that lacks of a better term, hippie-ish, so that you can understand how Chris views the world. Chris is a big fan of anti-materialism, which is a large contrast to the immaculate migration for gold in White Fang. However, Chris and Jack are much more similar than one would think, as Jack never shows much interest in the gold other than trying to obtain it in the beginning. In the final parts of the film, once Jack and his friend Alex find gold, Alex wants to take Jack to some property in San Francisco. But to his surprise, Jack decides to stay in Alaska and live in nature with White Fang. Just as Chris has more interest in the present moment, the journey, and observing creatures that dwell in nature, so does Jack. A similarity between these two stories is the fact that they leave out any significant love dynamic. The plots on their own as they frame each of the main characters don't need a glossed-over love story or a sappy happy ending. This on its own highlights the Alaskan nature aspect, especially when these two films are 16 years apart and they still share this aspect. This truly emphasizes the vast rural nature of Alaska, and it can be truly captured only when it's in full focus, which highlights the development of the main characters' journeys to happiness. We go back and forth between the present and flashbacks throughout the Into the Wild film. Christopher is plagued with wondering the key to happiness, which in turn gets highlighted in White Fang when Jack stumbles upon gold and is presented an opportunity to live a luxurious life in San Francisco. This decision cranks out a very emotional scene where Jack spends his last moments with White Fang before sending him back to the wild. He is yelling for him to go, and he takes out a stick which holds emotional scarring for White Fang when he was abused by a previous owner, and White Fang disappears. God! This scene represents the choices that people make when it comes to wealth, that people are willing to give up love in order to gain riches.
What? Yeah.
A similar scene from Into the Wild is shown when a final flashback occurs to Chris when he decides to stay with an elderly man during his journey. Chris and the man appreciate each other's wisdom and develop a special bond. The man shows interest in Chris more than any other parent would and provides him with many amenities. Chris also offers him a great shred of advice, pushing the man's limits and drives him up a hill, telling him that he must get back out in the world.
Keep going! You're doing great! Can anybody see this? God, are you watching this right now?
Following this scene, Chris in the present is struggling to find food in the wilderness of Alaska. He accidentally eats a poisonous plant that causes him starvation. His journey was his way of attempting to write a book. He takes out a pen and writes in one of the books that he had been reading. Happiness only real when shared, which can be directly tied to the flashbacks Chris had with the people he had met along the way. And only then was he truly happy. This directly relates to an article in Inkline, where it mentions that it contrasts to what Christopher said earlier in the film, joy cannot come from human relationships. Nevertheless, Chris discovered afterward that the opposite was true. In White Fang, Jack isn't the only main character. So is White Fang himself. His perspective takes a turn when he is admitted into the dark world of dogfighting. He was locked up in a cage and not shown 1 ounce of kindness. This is where the stick phenomenon takes place. Before Jack, White Fang was a completely different character, therefore enhancing the relationship as it shows that White Fang needs Jack too, which is backed up by Movie Guide that goes in depth on the history of Jack and White Fang's relationship, how it became so strong, and for Jack to, quote, change White Fang's nature. To conclude the in-depth glance at the theme that these 2 movies share, it's important to recognize the key aspects. The theme emphasized in these 2 films is each of the characters finding their path to happiness, as well as the power of friendship. Christopher had found happiness without even realizing it, and eventually figured it out once it was too late. On the other hand, Jack and White Fang had to keep on fighting to find their place in the world, according to Movie Guide. But eventually, they found happiness together, without the need for gold. Each of the films have certain aspects that fill the other. For example, Christopher disliking materialism translates to Jack rejecting gold at the end of the film, after searching for it the entire duration of the movie. This binds it together in the setting of each film. Alaska is presented to be a pure source of nature and experience, as presented by Christopher himself when he is telling everybody about his main goal of traveling to Alaska, as well as Jack's enthusiasm on staying in the Alaskan wilderness. These differing movies in terms of time and inspiration are what allow for the comparative analysis of them to be so compelling.
Sure as I'm breathing, sure as I'm